Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about verse 38 of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu Anubandham. These verses were arranged by Bhagavan and Murugan in a particular order, so there's a certain continuity about them. Though they were verses composed at different times under different circumstances, they arranged them in an order that gave, as far as possible, gave a continuity of ideas. So from verse 34 to 35, Bhagavan was talking about those who are learned. And in the third of those verses, he says, rather than those who have not subsided by though learned, those who are not learned are saved. So that gives a link to the next verse, because there he talks about those who are not subsided. And in the next verse, he talks about those who have come under the sway of the wicked whore who is praised, escaping slavery to her is difficult. That I'm just reading the gist of the verse. So it's from 36 to 38, Bhagavan is talking about humility. In 36, he says, rather than that merely be, what the implication is that merely being learned is of no use if we don't subside. And the opposite of subsiding is rising with pride. So in 37, he talks about the danger of falling a prey to flattery, to praise. And then in 38, he talks about his own state, the state of the jnani, the state in which one always abides firmly in tannile. That tannile is the state of, literally means one's own state, or the state of oneself. Bhagavan often uses this term tannile to refer to our natural state, our state of being as we actually are. So if we remain firmly in that state, who is there other than ourselves? That is the gist of a verse. And so since there's no one other than oneself, what does it matter if one is praised or is disparaged? This is the state of complete indifference to both praise and being disparaged, or praise and abuse, or praise and being put down. It doesn't matter if we are firmly in our own state, because there are no others beside ourselves. He begins this, the way this verse is composed, that is in verses, the sentence is often formed in a way that is not the natural prose form. So he begins here, the order of words in the verse is Tanandri Yarundu. Who is there besides oneself? Tanne ya en solil en. That means if who says what about oneself, what is used in the sense of so what. So if whoever says whatever about oneself, what does it matter? That's the idea. Tan tanne vartukinum tartukinum tan enna. Even if one praises oneself, even if one disparages oneself, so what? That is, whether we praise ourselves or disparage ourselves, it doesn't affect us. Like that for the jnani, whether what in our view is others, praise or disparage him, for him it's just like praising or disparaging oneself, because in his view there are no others. When I say his, I'm using the his in a generic form. It's not because obviously Vijnani is beyond all gender. Um, um, and then he ends the verse explaining the, the state in which this applies. The state in which this applies is tan pira endru oramo, without knowing oneself or others, tan nileo, in the state of oneself, peramo, without deviating or departing, without leaving the state of oneself, tan endrum nindridave, when one remains in that, when one remains always in that state, of one's own state, without ever leaving it, in that state, there is no distinction between oneself and others. That's what he means by saying not knowing oneself or others. That means not knowing the distinction between self and others. This is me, that is you. This difference is not there. There's no such differences, because in the state, in Tannile, in the state of oneself, there is only oneself, because what we actually are is pure being awareness, Satchit, which is infinite. And there cannot be anything other than what is infinite. So that is the one fundamental reality other than which nothing exists. It's only when we rise as ego that we see multiplicity. As Bhagavan says, for example, in verse 26 of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, Hande undain anatum undahum. If ego comes into being, everything comes into being. Hande indru anatum. If ego is not, everything is not. Hande yavamam. Ego itself is everything. Adalal yadu idu endru nadale yavad overdal yavamena or. Therefore, know that investigating what this is giving up everything. Investigating what this is means investigating what ego is. If we investigate ego, ego will subside, and when ego subsides, everything will subside. Likewise, in the final paragraph of Nana, he begins with the first two sentences are Tan erendal sakaloma erum. If oneself rises, everything rises. Tan adanginal sakaloma dangam. If oneself subsides, everything subsides. So all this multiplicity, all this distinction between oneself and others comes into being only when we rise as ego. So if we remain in our own real state, that is our state of pure being without rising, then who is there besides ourselves? There are no others. And therefore, praise and blame will not have any effect on one if we are in that state, because we will be the infinite whole, other than which there is nothing. So there are no others, either to praise or to blame. This is why Bhagavan was unaffected by whatever praise or whatever blame he was directed at him. For him, it was all, it was no different. There was no difference between praise and blame. They're all one and the same. So that's the import of this verse. If we, in our real state, there are no others, and therefore one is unaffected by praise and blame. That's the gist of the verse. There's one other thing I was going to say about it, but I've just slipped my mind now. It slipped my mind. It may come back later. So is there anything anyone wants to ask about this verse? Is the meaning clear?
So what was the context of this verse, Michael? Do you know? And what made Bhagavan compose this?
I can't remember. Vaguely, I have a feeling I did hear some story about it, but I can't remember. It doesn't come to my mind.
Hmm.
I think, or maybe nobody knows the context. I mean, by a lot of verses that Bhagavan composed, he would have composed in some context, but no one recorded what the context was, and so it's not now known. There may be some context. I mean, maybe someone has recorded what the context of this verse is. I can't remember.
Sure. If anyone has any questions pertaining to this verse, you can just put in the chat box and we'll post it to Michael, in the order received. And meanwhile, I have a question which Sanjay sent to me earlier. Let me just read that. Earlier, you used to say that this world is merely the mind's imagination, but of late, you seem to prefer the term mind's fabrication over mind's imagination. I've heard you say that the word imagination somehow does not seem entirely appropriate. Why do you say so?
Because we use imagination in because of the sense in which we generally use imagination. Um, it's not entirely wrong to use the word imagination. That is the term that Bhagavan uses in Tamil is kalpana, which is a Tamil form of the Sanskrit kalpana. And in Advaita Sastras, it's often said the world is manokalpana, which we can translate as a mental imagination, but I think it's better to translate as a mental fabrication because just to talk of imagination, it sounds a bit superficial. When we say fabrication, this world's entirely constructed by mind. It has no existence independent of the mind. So yes, in the sense it's an imagination, but it's an imagination in a much deeper sense than the sense in which we usually use the term.
So this fabrication and creation, we can say the alternative to fabrication is creation.
Yes, creation. It's also we can
That's
also
also
say
same. Yeah.
yes, yes,
Imagination is a weaker word, we can say. It's a
yes,
weak word in this context.
yeah, exactly.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Right.
So kalpana, right? That's the word that you're translating this
Kalpana.
fabrication.
Yes. Like in Nana, in the uh, seventh paragraph of Nana, what Bhagavan says is, Yatharthamai Uڵḷadu Atma-sarupam. What actually exists is only Atma-swarupa. Atma-swarupa means we can translate it as the real nature of ourself, but swarupa literally means own form. So it means what we actually are. So Atma-swarupa is ourself as we actually are. So that alone is what actually exists. And then in the next sentence, he says, Jagajiva Sipil Velipol Adil Karpanegal. The world, soul, and God are karpanas, fabrications in it, like the silver in a shell. That is, there's no, actually no silver in the shell, but it looks as if there's silver because of the deposit of whatever it is there that gives that shiny effect. So it looks a bit, I think it's called nacre or something. It's a bit like, it looks a bit like silver, but it's not actually silver. So the world, soul, and God, just like that silver in a shell, they're mere fabrications. And often he uses the term manokarpana, but whether he adds mano or not, it implies a mental fabrication. So everything is just a fabrication. The world, soul, and God, all are just a fabrication. Who is the fabricator? The one in whose view they all exist, namely ego. So it's when we rise as ego, all this multiplicity seems to exist. As he says in verse 4 of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. If oneself is not a form, who can see their forms and how? That is, when he talks about form, forms are what distinguish one thing from another. So in a state of formlessness, there are no distinctions. So our real state, our real nature, our Atma-swarupa is formless. It's devoid of any form, any distinctions, any divisions. But when we rise as ego, we project the form of a body, which we identify as ourselves, and through the five senses, we project so many other forms. And so that is what produces the appearance of God, world, and of world, soul, and God. Soul, of course, is the ego that is in whose view all these things exist. The world is all the other objects, and God is the power that is driving all these things. So, though Bhagavan says here, God is a karpana, that if we take God to be something other than ourselves, some power that is driving this world, that otherness is what is a fabrication. So the whatever concept we have of God is ultimately a mental fabrication, because what God actually is our own being. God is, the Swarupa of God is Atma-swarupa. That is, as he says in verse 24 of Upadesha Undya, Irkam ekayal isa jivagal orupolayava undipara. That is, by being nature. That means in their essential being, God and soul are just one portal. Portal here means one substance. They're the same, their substance is that being that he's talking about when he says Irkam ekayal. Upadi unave verundipara. It's the upadi unavu. Upadi means the limiting adjuncts, the things that we take ourselves to be. That is what creates the differences. Because we take ourselves to be a certain set of adjuncts, we can't conceive of God except as another set of adjuncts. So in our view, in the view of Jiva, God seems to be a set of adjuncts, but what God actually is our own being. So coming back to this paragraph 7, after saying that they're all kalpana, he says these three appear simultaneously and disappear simultaneously. That is, Ive mundrum ekakalatil tondri ekakalatil marikindrana. Ekakalatil means in one time or simultaneously. And then he concludes by saying, Sarupame jagam. That is, the Swarupa alone is the world. Swarupame nan. Swarupa alone is I. I means he is referring to ego or soul. Sarupame Ishwaran. Swarupa alone is God. Ellam Shiva Swarupamam. Everything is Shiva Swarupa. Obviously Shiva Swarupa or just Swarupa, they're referring to the same Atma Swarupa. Everything is only, well, what actually exists is only ourself. But all these seem to exist. Just like what actually is there is just a rope, but it seems to be a snake. Or what is actually there is just a shell, but it seems to be a piece of silver. So the world, soul, and God, they seem to be separate forms only in the view of ego. So they are fabrications. But what they all essentially are is just the one Swarupa, what we actually, our own being, Satchit, that the fundamental being awareness that we actually are.
Thank you, Michael. So, some are wondering, if, there was a person who came from abroad, who visited Bhagavan and sort of threatened to write, in a not so good way about Bhagavan and the ashram and so forth when he returned back to his country. There was some wondering in the chat box if it is related to that event. And also in the Ramana Upadesa Nunmale book, Swami had mentioned that this verse is composed for KV. Give me 1 second. KV Ramachandra Iyer.
Okay. Does he say the
just mention that
circumstances?
it doesn't go into the full context, but that he composed it specifically for Ramachandra Iyer. So,
okay. Yeah, I mean, that's what I say. I think there is some context, but I've forgotten what it is.
Yeah, so I'll just mention that. So give me 1 second. Oh, okay. Yeah, Carlos, go ahead. You said you had a question.
Hi, Kumar.
Mm.
Hi, everybody.
Mm.
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. We were discussing in our chat group a fragment of one of your videos where you said that Brahman or God is the substantial cause of the world, and ego is the efficient cause of the world.
Yes.
And could we also include there, like our Vishaya Vasanas could stand for the instrumental cause of ego to create the world?
The Vishaya Vasanas are collectively referred to as Vikarana Sarira because they are the seeds that give rise to that. But whose vasanas are they? They're ego's vasanas. So ego is the that is the vasanas may cause other things, but what is the cause of the vasanas? It's nothing but ego. So ultimately, ego alone is the efficient cause. But the vasanas come into being only when we rise as ego. Vasanas don't exist independent of ego. So though they are the seeds that give rise to everything, they give rise to everything in whose view? To whom do all these things appear? Only in the view of ego.
Yeah, I asked because because they're something other than ourself, actually, and it's something that ego appropriates.
Yes.
Maybe it could be considered like an instrument in a sense, but we take them to be I, in effect.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well, there's generally in Indian philosophy, they distinguish two types of causes. The upadana karana, in Sanskrit it's called upadana karana, which is the material cause or substantial cause, the substance of which all things are made. So that substance is Atma-swarupa, Brahman. They also talk about the nimitta karana, is the efficient cause. But in Tamil, they also talk about, Tamil philosophy, they also talk about a third type of cause, tunne karana, which is, tunne means auxiliary. We can translate that that in the sense in which that's used is in the sense of instrumental cause. So, for example, if you've got a table, what is the cause of the table? Well, the upadana karana, or in Tamil they call it mudal karana or mula karana, is that's a substantial cause is the wood. It's made out of wood. So without wood, there wouldn't be any table. But wood doesn't form itself into a table. What forms it into a table is a carpenter. But a carpenter can't do so with his bare hands. He needs some implements. He needs a saw. He needs a hammer and nails and whatever. So all the instruments he used, they are the tunai karana. So we could say that ego is the nimitta karana. Ego is the efficient cause. Ego is the doer. The instrument it uses to create all this is its vasanas. If we want to, I mean, we don't really have to analyze that much, but if we want to explain it, we can explain it in that way. But the important distinction is the distinction between the upadana karana and the nimitta karana. For example, Bhagavan begins I think the first verse in Guruvachaka Kovai, which is actually Bhagavan's teachings, is verse 19, if I remember correctly. And I'll just check it. It's 19. I was talking about it recently, I think last month. Yes, verse 19. He begins by saying that this verse 19 begins saying, Karana me, Karyama Kandalal. Since the cause alone is seen as the effect, their cause means the upadana karana, the material cause. So if the wood that is seen as a table, it is clay that is seen as a pot, it is Brahman that is seen as all this multiplicity. Most people take God to be the nimitta karana. God, here we can equate God with Brahman. They take Brahman to be the nimitta karana. But Bhagavan says, no, God is not the nimitta karana. God is, I mean, Brahman, let's say Brahman, just to avoid confusion. Brahman is not the nimitta karana. Brahman is just pure being. It remains as it is. The nimitta karana is ego, because it's only when we rise as ego that we see all this multiplicity. That's why earlier I was talking about verse 26 of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, in which Bhagavan says, Ahandayundayin anatumundaham. If ego comes into being, everything comes into being. Ahandayindrail indru anatum. If ego is not, everything is not. Ahandaya yavamam. Ego itself is everything. So we can also say that the ultimate upadana karana is Brahman. But the intermediate upadana karana is ego. That is, its ego sees itself as the world. That's why he says, Ahandaya yavamam. Ego itself is everything. But when I say immediate, that is, ego is seeing itself as all this. But if ego looks at itself to see what it actually is, it will see it's Brahman. That's why we can say ego is the immediate upadana karana. The ultimate upadana karana is Brahman, because ego is nothing other than Brahman.
Yeah, so long as it's looking outwards, you could consider to be the upadana karana in the sense of
Yeah.
But when it turns within to merge within itself. Huh?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. That's
Right.
clear. Can I ask you a quick question? One second quick question.
Yes.
I'm curious as to who did in Tamil verses you have to separate, to split the words, right?
Yes.
Padam Pirital, I think it's called.
Yeah.
I was wondering who did that in the first place. Was Bhagavan himself who did that, or devotees, or?
No, devotee. I mean, but Bhagavan wrote the verses. When writing the verses, all the words are, because the verses are split according to meter. So, for example, in this verse, the first line is the first foot of the meter is Tanandri. Tanandri is two words, Tan and Andri, but they get merged together. Then the next foot is Yarundu. That's two words. Ya, who, Undu is there. Who is there besides oneself? And then but often words get split between half of a word may be in one foot, half may be in another foot. So the first thing you need to do in order to understand a verse, you need to understand what the words are. So you need to, whereas the verse is split according to the meter, in order to make out the meaning, you first got to split it according to the words. Because another thing, like as in Sanskrit, in Tamil, there's something called Sandhi. Sandhi means the euphonic fusion of different words. So, for example, Tiru Anamalai becomes Tiru Vanamalai. A V is added there. Other words, I mean, there are different rules depending on what is the last letter of the previous of one word and the first letter of the next word. There are rules as to how they should join. So there's the sandhi has to be split, and also the words have to be split according to the meaning rather than according to the meter.
So that was done by devotees, like Muruganar, for example?
Yeah. I mean, anyone can do that. If you understand the verse, the first thing, but I mean, you can interpret the verse. For people who know Tamil well, the splitting the words is unnecessary because they automatically see what the words are. But as an aid to people who don't know Tamil so well, often they do what is called padachetam, or as you say, padam pirital. Padachetam is the Sanskrit term. Padam pirital is the Tamil equivalent. That is, you split it according to the words. That's to help people to understand. And then often in Tamil they do, often it's necessary to do what is called anvayam, to rearrange the words in a natural prose order. Because as I explained in this verse, the last two lines is, the last two lines means when one always stays without departing the state of oneself, without knowing oneself and others. That is the meaning of the last two lines. That logically has to come at the beginning. So you have to rearrange the words like that. So that again is whoever is interpreting the verse has to do that. But also sometimes some verses, there are alternative ways of splitting them. So you can interpret the same word, same verse in different ways. That's why particularly if you take texts like the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the Brahma Sutra, these are the Prasthanatraya, the three source texts of Vedanta, they have been interpreted in so many different ways by different people. But I mean, part of the reason they interpret it in different ways is according to their basic beliefs. They see different meanings in it, but they also often will split words differently to give different meaning.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Michael.
Yeah. For example, tatvamasi, very simple meaning is tat tvam asi, that you are. But the Dvaitins, the dualists, they have some other way of splitting that, and they give some completely opposite meaning. They somehow interpret it to mean that you are not. I don't know how they do that, but you can, playing around with grammar and with Sandhi and everything, you can completely change the meaning. But basically, we need to understand what is the intent. With Bhagavan, it's very clear what is the intent. Bhagavan is very clearly, it would be very, a dualist would be very hard pressed to give a dualistic interpretation to Bhagavan's teachings, because it's so clearly non-dualistic. But even I mean, there's clear non-duality particularly in the Upanishads, also in the Bhagavad Gita, but people still interpret it. Krishna says in the Gita, Aham Atma Gudakesha, I am the self Gudakesha. He's addressing Arjuna as Gudakesha. I am the self in the hearts of all living beings. I'm the beginning, the middle, and the end. But how many of people interpret it, that doesn't mean Krishna is our self. There are two selves in us. There's Atma and there's Paramatma. So Krishna, when he says he's Atma, he's actually referring to Paramatma. So Krishna is different, we are different. So they're actually giving a completely different meaning to Krishna. Clearly says, I am the self. I'm basically he's saying, I'm yourself. And he's the self in every one of us. But because they don't want to admit that non-duality, they say, no, he's not Atma, he's Paramatma. As if Atma and Paramatma are two different things.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Michael.
Right.
Namo Ramanaya.
Thank you,
No
Mike.
more Ramana.
So, coming back to the verse, that Swami refers to, Sadhu Om refers to Ramana Sahasram verse 168. I don't know if you have the book with you. Could you check on that? Verse 168. So while Michael is looking for it, I think Jacqueline says, allow this verse. It seems that the ego-risen knowledge pales in comparison to the de facto Satchit. Who is there besides oneself? Perhaps more than pales is unreal, a better view, so to speak. I think so. And then when Michael's done with this,
168.
Yeah, 168. Yeah.
Do you have it? Because it's,
I don't have it because he just quoted that verse.
Okay, what he says is Pureyase. I'm not quite sure what Pure means here. But Ase Mundral. Among the three desires, Purase Miha Uramam is Puhalase, the desire for praise, for appreciation, for whatever, is extremely strong. Morika, when it is Uḍļļadu Nāṛpadu Anubandham. The one who rises as I in the body, the one who firmly rises as I in the body, okay, it's a bit, it takes me some time when I'm not familiar with the verse to decipher exactly what it means.
No problem.
But he has.
I think he's talking about the Puhalase, right?
Yeah.
The desire to be praised, which is
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. It's yes. That is so. But the meaning he gives is the extreme. Again, I need to read it carefully. Among the extremely kodia, the extremely wicked three, or the harmful three desires, among them, the desire for praise, appreciation is extremely strong. Ade orica, then if you want, if one wants to destroy that, if Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, the one who rises in this body as I, that ahande, that ego, stiramaha arital, firmly destroying it, there's only one way. Therefore, for that, you alone now that is graciously mercifully, or Devu Seya Vendam, you by your grace you bring about the destruction of that ego. That's
So it's basically that philosophical truth and with the prayer, embedded with the prayer.
Yeah.
Because only Bhagavan's grace
Ramana
can...
Sahasram is full of Bhagavan's teachings in the form of prayers. That is, every verse contains an important teaching of Bhagavan expressed in the form of a prayer. That is, whatever Bhagavan says we should do, he prays, make me do that.
Right. In the it's interesting you mentioned that. So in the invite that I sent for today's session, actually I had a link for all the Ramana Sahasram verses in Patha Sri Ramana that you translated.
Okay.
You know, so if for those who haven't seen it, you know, when you go back and look at my invite, there's a link for all the Ramana Sahasram verses that Michael's talking about, the Ramana Sahasram book that are embedded in Patha Sri Ramana. So, okay, coming back to the question here, Richard, there's another question from Richard, is what is the difference, if any, between being absorbed in the here and now and self-attention?
It depends on what we understand by here and now. Because our attention is going outwards, our attention has become a very blunt instrument. Because we're always attending to gross things, our power of attention has become very gross. If we want to refine the power of attention, we need to attend to what is extremely subtle. The subtlest of all subtle things is our own, is Satchit, that the pure being awareness that we actually are. So we need to, by attending to ourselves, we are refining the power of attention. So now, because our attention has become, our power of discernment has become very gross because of constantly dwelling upon gross names and forms, what we call the present moment is the moment in which everything is happening. But in order for things to happen, a duration of time is necessary. So things happen in the flow of time. But what is the exact present moment? If we analyze it, any moment in which things happen is a moment with duration. But if we go deep into what is the exact present moment is that infinitesimally fine interface between the past and the future. That is, one moment earlier is past, one moment ahead is future. So what is the fine interface between those? If we drill down into the present moment, the ultimate present moment has no duration. So in a moment with no duration, nothing can happen. So what do we find in that exact present moment? Is nothing but being. There's no doing in the precise present moment. Doing or happening happens within the flow of time. So it's in the approximate present moment that all things happen. Not in the precise present moment. In the precise present moment, there's no duration, so nothing can happen. So in that precise present moment, there's only being. Our own being, that is.
And that precise present moment is eternity, is infinity.
Well, yeah,
we are.
What you say is correct, but let's not jump ahead. First, we have to understand the precise present moment is infinitesimally small. But in that infinitesimally small present moment is eternity. That's why it is sometimes said that Atma-swarupa, or Brahman, it's smaller than the smallest and bigger than the biggest. Because everything is contained in that present moment. The same with the present place. And that is what makes, here means the present place. Now means the present moment. What is it that makes the present, the present moment and the present place? What is it that makes them present? It's the presence of ourself. That moment in which we are present is now. The place in which we are present is here. But now because we're identified with a body, we say, this where I am now, this is here, that is there. So it's time and space come into being only when we rise as ego and identify ourselves as a body. So the presence of ourself is, we mistake to be the presence of the body, because we are now, we identify this body as ourself. So now we're at a certain point in time and space. That point in time and space which we're currently experiencing is what we take to be the present. But as I say, if we go down into the precise present moment, we arrive at nothing but our own being. Likewise, if we go down into the precise present place, that everything else, every object, every phenomenon is something other than ourselves. So it's something removed from ourselves. So the exact present place is our own being again. So whether we go through we analyze through the time route or through the place route, we come back to our own being. So ultimately, that if we understand what makes the present is our own presence, then attending to here and now means attending to our own presence, our own being. So it is the same as self-attentiveness. But generally, when people talk about being in the here and now, they're not going so deep. So, like often it's taught in meditation, you should attend to whatever is happening. Whatever is happening is not exactly now. It's in the flow of time. So it's in the approximate present moment that things are happening. So long as we're attending to happenings, to doings, it's not self-attentiveness. Because we exist whether there's anything happening or anything being done or not. In sleep we exist. There's no doing, no happening in sleep. There's just pure being. So we are something distinct from all happening and doing. So attending to anything that is happening or anything that is being done is not self-attentiveness. It's attending to something other than ourselves. That's why it's so important to understand, to have a clear understanding. Otherwise, we'll not understand. We'll not be able to put it into practice unless we clearly understand what the practice is. Recently, someone sent me a recording of where a certain well-known speaker, someone who is very popular in this sort of neo-Advaita type thing, and this person was arguing, but he said, we can't talk about attending to ourselves. And he gave a very strange argument. He went back to the etymology of attend. Attend means that it comes from the Latin root ad tendere. Ad means to or towards. Tendere means to, literally in Latin, it means to stretch. So to attend, the etymological meaning of attend is to stretch towards. So but even, this is a fallacious argument, because even in Latin, attend, they used it in the same sense that we used it. That just the etymology, you can't always understand the meaning of a term from its etymology. Anyway, he said, you can attend to things other than yourself because you can stretch your mind to other things, but you can't stretch your mind to yourself, so you can't attend to yourself. Therefore, it's wrong to say that you can attend to yourself. So what is self-inquiry? Self-inquiry means you have to let go of everything. But that's a complete misunderstanding, because we understand Bhagavan's teaching. The important thing about Bhagavan's teachings, merely letting go of other things will result in laya. Every night when we fall asleep, we're too tired to continue attending to other things, so we let go of everything and we subside in sleep. But that's not the means to self-knowledge. So letting go of things will lead to manolaya. As Bhagavan said about yoga, yoga's chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is curbing or stopping the activity of the mind. But Bhagavan said merely stopping the activity of the mind leads to laya. So it's not sufficient just to stop the activity of the mind. We need to, in order to destroy the mind or ego, we need to know what we actually are, because ego or mind is nothing but a false awareness of ourself. So only when we know ourselves will ego be destroyed. And in order to know ourselves, we need to attend to ourselves. So merely ceasing to attend to other things is not sufficient. In yoga, as a technique for withdrawing the attention from other things, they use pranayama, because pranayama is a way of stopping mental activity. But pranayama, as Bhagavan says very clearly in the 8th paragraph of Nana, it's an aid to restrain the mind, but it cannot bring about manonasa. So if we take self-inquiry or self-investigation merely to be letting go of other things, firstly, we can't let go of other things without us. I mean, that's why pranayama is used in yoga, because pranayama is a special technique for forcing us to let go of everything else. Because if you restrain the breath, the mind automatically comes to a stop and lets go of everything. But it subsides only in laya. So if you want to let go of things by any other means, you're going to fail, because the very nature of the mind is clinging. So it's if you tell people just let go of everything, stop attending to anything, how can you stop attending to anything? The only means, other than self-investigation, is the yogic technique of pranayama. But this person who said this is a very, very well-known person. His videos on YouTube, thousands of people watch it, and there's even paywalls. If you want to see more, you have to pay lots of money, and it's a bit like a business he runs. But he doesn't understand the fundamentals of self-investigation. But because he talks in a very nice way, as if it's people get fooled by it. So if we want to follow Bhagavan's path, we need to understand. We need to really pay close attention to his teachings and understand at a subtle level. Because there's so many, you're coming back to your question, attending to the present moment. There's so many people who say, be in the present moment, attend to the present. But they're not talking about the same thing Bhagavan is talking about, because Bhagavan isn't talking about attending to everything that's happening. He's talking about attending to ourselves. To whom is it all happening? To whom mean Bhagavan? People think you have to ask to whom. Bhagavan never says ask to whom. Bhagavan says investigate to whom. Investigating to whom means turning our attention away from whatever is happening back towards ourselves, the one to whom it's all happening, one in whose view it's all happening.
Thank you, Michael. I really love your answer, and it's our self that gives light to everything.
Yes, exactly. And so all we have to do is to attend to that light which is ourself, that light of pure awareness.
Thank you.
If we I was talking to someone a few days ago, because she had written something to me and she didn't understand what the practice of self-investigation is. Though she had been reading Bhagavan for many years, she still hadn't understood. So I was explaining there are two things. That is, when we want to practice self-investigation, there are two obstacles. The first obstacle is lack of understanding. If we don't understand correctly what Bhagavan is talking about, we won't be able to put it into practice. So these people who talk all sorts of nonsense and say you can't attend to yourself, they cannot help people follow Bhagavan's path because they haven't themselves understood. So we cannot follow Bhagavan's path without correctly understanding what it is we have to do. But understanding what we have to do, that is the easy part. Once we understand but all that is required is self-attentiveness, and once we understand what is meant by self-attentiveness, then we come up against the real obstacle. A really serious obstacle is our lack of willingness. Because in order to hold on to ourselves, we need to let go of everything else. It's true we need to let go of everything. It's just you can't just let go of things without either controlling your breath or attending to yourself. Controlling the breath will take you into Manolaya, so that's no use. So the only way is to attend to ourselves. We don't want to attend to ourselves. We have such inclination to attend to other things is so strong because we've been cultivating that inclination through countless lives. Those inclinations to attend to other things are what are called Vishaya Vasanas. That's why we need to, patient and persistent practice is necessary to gradually weaken the Vishaya Vasanas and strengthen the Satvasana. Satvasana means the inclination to attend to our own being and thereby to be as we actually are. So if we haven't even understood what is the practice, we haven't even begun. But once we've understood the practice, that's the easy bit. It's not difficult. Bhagavan, if we pay close attention to what Bhagavan has said, it's relatively easy to understand. If we've got at least got a certain degree of subtlety of understanding, we can understand what Bhagavan is talking about. But then actually putting it into practice, that's the real challenge. That's why Bhagavan said, Bhakti is the mother of jnana. Because without all-consuming love, to surrender ourselves completely, to subside forever back into our source, without ever rising again to know anything else, we cannot succeed in this path. But the only way to cultivate that all-consuming love is by patient and persistent practice.
And that patient and persistent practice will carry us beyond any understanding.
Well, we first need to have the understanding, because otherwise what are we to practice? If we haven't understood, we'll be practicing something wrong. So we first need to understand, but the understanding is preliminary.
Yeah.
And once we understand and put it into practice, as we go deeper and deeper in the practice, we get more and more clarity. So that understanding is the beginning of the clarity that we need to develop, but we can develop the clarity further only by practice. That is, we get a certain amount of clarity by Sravana and Manana. Sravana means paying close attention to what Bhagavan has actually said. And that means we need to have reliable sources, not all these inaccurate translations, inaccurate recordings. We need to have something accurate translations, and then only we can understand what Bhagavan is saying. So we need to pay close attention to what Bhagavan actually said. That's Sravana. Then we need to make sense of it. We need to think about it carefully. And like the question you asked now, this is a part of the process of manana. We're trying to understand what is the difference between the attending to the present moment that so many people talk about and attending to the present moment as meant by Bhagavan. We need to understand these things. This requires manana. The Sravana and Manana give a certain degree of clarity, but the real deep clarity comes only from practice. So the deeper we go in the practice, the deeper our Sravana and Manana will become. So the same verses that we've been reading for 50 years, they'll become more and more meaningful to us. We'll see more and more implication in Bhagavan's words.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Michael. So the next question is from Lindsay. If she asks, if there is no one else, should I direct my prayers to Ramana inward?
Yes, absolutely.
I find it difficult to pray because what separate thing am I praying to?
Yes, it's to your own being. Bhagavan is never separate from us. In his view, we are nothing other than him. But because we have risen as ego, we have created a seeming separation. But that from which we've seemingly separated ourselves is nothing but our own being. That is Bhagavan. So when we pray to him, our prayers should all be directed inwards. Bhagavan is ever shining there in our heart as our own being. He is our own reality, what we actually are. He appeared outwardly in name and form to give us these teachings, to turn our mind back within. So when we pray to him, we should direct our prayers inwards. That's why in so many verses of Arunachala Stuti Panchakam, Bhagavan is seemingly praying to an external form, but he keeps on saying that Arunachala who shines in the heart of the killer of the soul and so on. He's constantly well, he's not intentionally reminding us because that poetry just poured forth from him, but his words constantly remind us that Arunachala is ever present in our heart. So what we should pray to is ever present in our heart. We're not praying to some distant God, we're praying to the ever present, ever shining God in our heart.
Yes, Michael. I would like to add in response to that question, verse 5 of Upadesavundiyar, Ennuru Yavam Irayuruvam and Yenni Vadipadal Vadipara. If you could elaborate on that, or if you just translate that, it'll be great.
Ennuru Yavam can be interpreted in two ways. The immediate meaning is Ennuru refers to the Ashtamurti. And in Sanskrit version, Bhagavan use the term Ashtamurti. Ashtamurti means 8 forms of God. Those 8 forms are the 5 elements, sun, moon, and Jiva is usually how it's explained. So basically, everything is included in that. Another meaning, a deeper meaning, is En can mean thought. So Ennuru Yavam, everything which are the forms of thought. That is all, as Bhagavan said, the world is nothing but thought. It's our own mental fabrication. So, but whichever way we talk about it, Ennuru Yavam includes everything. Whether we take it as Ennuru meaning the 8 forms or the form of thought, it includes everything. So, Ennuru Yavam, Ireyuru Amena, Enni Varipado. So, considering everything to be a form of God, worshipping accordingly is good worship of God. So, it's important to understand, Bhagavan isn't saying see everything as God. We can't see everything as God without seeing ourselves as God. So seeing everything as God is the ultimate aim. When we see ourselves as God, we will see everything as God because God alone exists. So, but there he says, Enni means considering, thinking. So considering everything to be a form of God and worshipping accordingly is good worship of God. This is a very broad definition Bhagavan gives of puja. It of course includes all ritualistic puja, but it extends the meaning of puja beyond that. For example, if you see a hungry person and you offer them food, considering that it is God himself who has come in the form of that hungry person, and you are given that you're not doing a good to that hungry person, you have been given an opportunity to serve God in the form of that hungry person, that is good worship of God. If you see all the harm that is being done to the environment by human activity, and you try to reduce your environmental impact, try to live an eco-friendly lifestyle, because you consider everything to be a form of God, that is good worship of God. So Bhagavan gives us a very, very broad definition of puja.
Thank you, Mike.
Is it clear?
Yes, Murun said
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like taking care of or being eco-aware, being conscious of the earth is also, is worship of God.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it's not necessarily worship of God, but if we do it with that attitude,
yeah,
that's why Bhagavan said we need to understand all these verses in the context of verse 3, in which he says, Kartanu karkum nishkarmya karmam, karate tiriti aktundi para, gati varikambikam undi para. That is, kartanu karkum means done for God. The nishkamya karma that is done for God, that implies done for the love of God, will purify the mind, and that will show the way to liberation. Well, the word he uses, kambikam, means it will cause us to see the way to liberation. Because when our mind is purified, we will get the clarity to recognize that the means to liberation is not doing anything but just being. That's what he's slowly leading up to. That's why he comes to that in verses 8 and 9. But that clarity to understand what he's talking about in verse 8 and 9 and to try to put it into practice, that requires a certain purity of mind, which is gained by what he talks about in verses 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
right. So when Murugan, I'm sorry, Richard pointed out this, the practice of focusing on the present, as you say, as explained by Bhagavan.
Present time or present place.
Right. So that, yeah, that's where I'm
Which
coming
is
at
our
this. So
own
that,
presence.
yeah. So the final words of Sadhana Saram came to my mind. It's beautifully, Swami had explained that to verse 291. I don't know if you have access to that now or not. And
I've got it there, but I just
yeah,
anyway.
So I'll just read the English translation of that verse. Among the three places or persons, the first, second, and third persons, and among the three times, the present, past, and future, the first person, known in Tamil as Tanmayidam or selfness place, and the present time, or the place and time that Sadhguru Sri Ramana told us to scrutinize as our dhyana lakshya, or target of attention. Period. If you abide, attending with subtle vigilance to either of these, investigating who is the first person who shines as I, or what is the present time that shines as the consciousness I am, you will experience the supreme joy of self, Atma-vichara. Having accomplished yoga and having become one who has attained siddhi, the state of final liberation. Period. See and feast upon self thus.
Yes. Though he says either of these two, actually in practice they're one and the same.
Yeah.
Because what, as I said, what makes the present moment present, what makes the present place present, is the presence of ourself. And one thing that needs clarification there, in English we talk about the three persons. The three persons is not talking about person per se. The first person is I, second person you, and third person is he, she, or it. So everything else is that's in grammar. In the context of Bhagavan's teachings, first person obviously means I, the ego. Second and third persons is everything else. The terms that are used in Tamil, so whereas in English we talk about persons, in Tamil they talk about places. And in Tamil, the terms that are used are very meaningful. The first person is called Tanmay, or Tanmayidam. Idam means place. But Tanmay means selfness. So it's referring to ourself, the one we always experience as I. The second person is called Munile. Munile means what stands in front. So what is immediately presented to us, that is Munile. Padake means what is spread out. So everything other than what is immediately presented to us is Padake. So second,
the third person, right?
The third person. Yes,
yeah.
Sorry. So when Bhagavan talks about second and third persons, he means everything other than ourself. Both the things that are immediately presented before us, we can understand in physical terms what the world as we actually see it, and the world as we conceive it. I mean, so many things we don't see. We don't see the world as it was in the past. We don't see the world as it will be in the future. That is, the scientists talk about the Big Bang, but the Big Bang is not something there in front of us. It is padake. It's something spread out far in the past or something. Likewise, in space, the world we are aware of is only a limited part of the supposedly vast universe. But both the immediate world and the spread out world that we're not immediately aware of all exist only in our own mind. That is the Big Bang and all of history and all of geography and all of science. Where does it exist? It exists only in our own mind. And likewise, the world that we see in front of us, Where does it exist? It exists only in our own mind. So Munile Padake, second and third persons, includes everything other than ourself. And Tanmay refers to ourself as the first person. So when the Tanmay is the immediate present place. Munile is the place just near in front of us, and Padake is everything else. We can also understand it a more in a more subtle way, rather than in understanding in physical terms. We can understand in mental terms. So the thoughts that are immediately present to us, they are munile. The thoughts about things far away, that is padake. So we can understand it in different ways, but we need not analyze what is munile, what is padake. Bhagavan always puts them together. So it includes everything other than ourselves. So all places other than this present place where I am. Because the reason it's called place is that conceptually, we are ever present, we are ever here. The second person is what is in front of us, or what's immediately presented to us. The third person is everything else.
Yeah, the Tamil is very clear, right?
Yes.
So in this instance, so normally in English, second person means the guy I'm talking to, right? I mean, the one is in front of me.
Yeah.
And then third person is like sort of about everything else.
Yeah.
But then you give a more profound meaning. It's like second person is just about any thought, basically, that is other than ourselves, any thought other than, so that's a big distinction there.
Yeah.
And then third person is just everything else.
Yeah.
And then another beautiful point is the word in Tamil that is used to refer to the third person is pararke. Pararke means that which spreads out.
Yeah.
Just the word itself beautifully explains how it comes into being. It just completely spreads out. Pararke. This.
Yeah. In Western philosophy, particularly in modern Western philosophy, they often talk about first person and third person. First person view, third person view, and like that. They never mention second person because they don't. It wouldn't be so meaningful in English, but in Tamil it's very meaningful because of firstly because of this spatial conception of the three persons. They're talking about the three places rather than the three persons, and also because the terms that are used are very, very meaningful.
In this context, when you asked about this to Swami, he apparently responded, I think either you mentioned to me or I might have read it somewhere. Well, I would give a different answer if somebody else asked, and then for you, it's a different answer. Do you remember that?
Yes. Well, that is something I found because I was in all about 8.5 years, not even quite 8.5 years with Sadhu Om. And I questioned him relentlessly. I don't think anyone questioned him as much as I did. But as I questioned more and more, I found I was getting deeper and deeper answers. But sometimes I would hear, after I'd heard a very nice deep answer from him, I would hear someone else asking him a question, and he would give an answer, but he had explained to me that is not quite the correct answer. So I would say, why didn't you give the deeper answer? He said, the answer that he gave is all that would satisfy them at that time. He said, let them ask deeper questions, then they'll get deeper answers. And Swami often used to say about Bhagavan, the reason many of the things that are in, for example, what's recorded in talks and day by day and Maharsha's gospel and these things, we can very clearly see when people most of the questions there are very superficial questions. So Bhagavan's answers aren't so very deep. Occasionally there are some somewhat deeper questions. Bhagavan gives somewhat deeper answers. But Swami said, Bhagavan's answers, it's always according to the questioner. That's why Shiva Prakasham Pillai, because he's so well attuned to Bhagavan, but without knowing anything about Bhagavan, except he's some young boy who is sitting there who he thinks maybe has some answers. He was somehow drawn to Bhagavan. The first question he asked him is, Swami, who am I? So what a perfect disciple for the Guru. But what Bhagavan had come to teach was this path of investigating who am I. He asked exactly the right question. So Shiva, what Shiva, the answers that he recorded, Bhagavan himself later rewrote in the form of an essay because it was such a valuable account of Bhagavan's teachings. So Shiva Prakasham Pillai is a really exemplary disciple. Even more than that, Murugana. It's because of Murugana that we really have Bhagavan's teaching. I mean, without Shiva Prakasham Pillai and Bhagavan and Murugana, we wouldn't know much about Bhagavan's teachings nowadays. Because of Shiva Prakasham Pillai, we have Nana. Because of Murugana, we have Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, Upadesha Undiyar, Atma-vichara, Guru Vachaka Kovai, and so many other things. Because Murugana was so well attuned to Bhagavan, when he, like for Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, he asked such an appropriate question. Meyin ilbum adu mevan tiranam. What is the nature of reality and the means of attaining it? Revealed to us so that we may be saved. So that the people of the world may be saved. So he asked, by asking that question, he basically gave Bhagavan a blank sheet. That is, he's not, if we read books like Talks and Day by Day and things, people ask Bhagavan, but Bhagavan, I'm doing Gayatri Japa, is it good? What does Bhagavan answer? Yes, of course it's good. So that is, such people are not really going very, very deep, but Murugan asked a question, very fundamental question. What is the nature of reality? And even more important, what is the means of attaining it? Because of that, we have Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, such a precious work. And Murugan also, he recorded Guru Vachaka Kovai, which is a treasure house of Bhagavan's teachings, because he understood what are the really important teachings, and he recorded all those in the form of verses, which Bhagavan, and every verse Bhagavan looked at and corrected, and so it's such a valuable record of Bhagavan's real teachings. That is what Bhagavan wants to tell us, rather than what people want Bhagavan to tell them.
Right. Thank you, Michael. Let's go with the last question for today from Bruce. Bruce, go ahead, and we'll conclude the session.
Okay, so the question I have, concerns grace, right? And grace is one, but grace is also described as being divided between God, Guru, and Jiva. And I wanted to make the analogy of comparison because grace continuously is pouring down, right? Constant, it's just the nature of grace is such that it's constantly flowing. So it makes sense to me that as Jiva, who is looking in ego form outward, that when like my attention is on the jada objects, for example, right? The rain is dropping on it and the rain flows off of it, right? But it's constantly flowing onto those objects, and therefore the confusion which is the ego's confusion, misinterprets that as source, whereas when we divide the grace into God, God, Guru, and Jiva, the grace of Jiva is turning towards Guru. It, I believe, is correct, and that the function of Guru is such that its embodiment that we can identify because of us, our being human, if we want to call it that. We identified the Guru form, and that turns us towards ourself, and which is like it is. So if you could talk about why the grace is divided into three, just to
Right. Okay. Well,
clarify that a little bit. I'm just throwing some thoughts out.
Okay. It's not actually divided into three.
Of course,
because,
right.
As Bhagavan says in the first sentence of the 12th paragraph of Nana, Kadavulum Guruvum Unmail Verala. God and Guru are in truth not other. So though we talk about God and Guru, we need to understand they're one and the same. And as he says in verse 24 of Upadeshundiya, Irukumiyakayalisa Jivagal Oru Paraleaba. That means by their being nature, God and Jiva are just one substance. So that is, God, Guru, and Jiva are essentially one and the same. And that power, the power of grace, is one. God, the aim of God and Guru is always to draw us back. That is, God is our own self. He is what we actually are. So God or Guru, I just use the word God for convenience, or I'll use the word Bhagavan because Bhagavan is God and Guru. Bhagavan wants nothing other than for us to be happy, because happiness is our real nature. So his grace is always working to draw us back within, because there's no happiness in the objects of the world. Happiness lies only in happiness is what we actually are. It's our real nature. So only when we subside back within will we experience the infinite happiness that we always actually are. So God's grace will always be drawing us back within. However, that grace works through us because God is nothing other than our own being. So when that grace is also sometimes called Chit Shakti, the power of awareness. When we direct that Chit Shakti outwards to know the world, that one power appears in the form of Maya Shakti. When that same Chit Shakti is the power of awareness is turned back within, in other words, when we direct our attention back within, that same power that was working as Maya works as grace. So grace and Maya are not two different powers. They're one and the same power, used differently. So it's up to us. Do we want to be caught up in this Maya, in which case we should attend to other things? Or do we want to surrender ourselves completely to the grace, in which case we should attend to ourselves? So it's all just, there's only one power. It's how we use that power. So the nature of Jiva means ego, is to always attend to things other than itself. So the love to turn within is contrary to the nature of ego. So where is that love to, without love, we cannot turn back within. So where is that love to come from? It comes only from Bhagavan, who is our own self. So grace is that which is transforming our love for the world into love for our own being. So the process of grace is undermining the Maya and restoring us thereby back to our real state of pure being, pure awareness, pure happiness, pure love. It's all one power. But in order for that power to work as it's meant to work, which is to pull us back within, we need to cooperate with it. But in order for us to cooperate with it, we need to be willing to cooperate with it. So it's the grace is working to make us willing to yield ourselves to that grace. But as Bhagavan said, grace is not something external. It's not something up in heaven that's going to one day fall down on us. Grace is ever present, ever shining in our heart as our own being. So the grace has to work through us, which means we have to cooperate with the grace. We need to yield ourselves to that inward pull of grace. Now what we are doing, we're yielding ourselves to the outward pull of Maya. So we need to change our allegiance. We need to change our servitude from servitude to Maya to servitude to grace. Ultimately, it's all done only by grace, but grace will never force it upon us until we want it. So grace works to make us want it. We have to cooperate with that by trying our best to turn within.
So
Is that a clear answer?
it's helpful. I guess I'm also trying to tie, and maybe this is not a correct thing to tie it to, but in the description of Ramakrishna, we have the idea of the mound, right?
Yeah.
And grace is constantly falling, but it runs off the mound, right?
Yes, the mound is there an analogy for the ego that rises high.
Yeah, but it's rises high. But let's go a little deeper in that analogy, and because I wanted to make a second point, which is I think a curious point, because I think it applies to ego. So the analogy of the mound is, it obviously implies gravity in this case, right? And flowing down off of that which rises up.
Yeah.
Right now, but the actual nature of grace to collect in the low points, right, is also just the effect of that same effect, because so yes, grace accumulates at the low point, like the ocean, if you want to call it, but at the same time, just as an analogy, if there was a hole in the ocean, the grace would flow through that hole. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
And because it doesn't, it's not that it's adhering to the low point. And it's that the grace collects in the low point. And I guess what I'm asking in a sense is, and I'm not questioning the concept of humility. That is not what I'm questioning, but I'm questioning, what I'm suggesting is that grace is beyond humility, is what I'm getting at. We identify with the humble aspect of it, maybe because we find ourselves bathing in grace in that low point of humility. But the reality is that the mound is constantly being also showered with grace, though it is constantly shedding grace at the same time. Do you see what I'm
Yeah, I see, but I don't think we should complicate things. It's a very simple, but that is Ramakrishna used that analogy to make a very simple point. But to the extent to which we subside, to that extent do we imbibe the grace. To the extent to which we rise as ego, to that extent does the ever-present grace run off us. So the key point is subsidence. That's what Bhagavan's teachings are all about. Subsiding, subsiding, subsiding. Humility is nothing but grace, because humility is the subsidence of ego, or rather the non-rising of ego. That is grace.
Non-rising, yeah.
That is grace. Let's not complicate it more.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree with that. And that was my point also.
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to like focus in on the grace itself is really all that there is.
Yes.
That's my point.
Our own being.
Yeah. That's really what I wanted to focus on. Yeah.
In fact, in verse wait a second, 965, I think, of Guru Vachaka Kavai, Bhagavan begins by saying, is it 965? No, sorry, 966. Uλλade Ullamenum Ongum Tiruvaralo. So he's saying there, Ulladu, that is what is, alone is grace. And that is ever shining or rising high as I, as am, as we are, to put precisely, but we are means I am in this context. So our own being is grace. And so if we're turning our back on our own being and looking outwards, we are misusing that grace as Maya. So we need to turn back to our own being. That is yielding ourselves to grace. To the extent to which we turn our attention back to our own being, we subside and immerse ourselves in the grace. To the extent to which we attend to other things, we rise and immerse ourselves in Maya.
Yeah.
Maya and grace are both the same Chit Shakti, but Maya is the misused Chit Shakti. Grace is the Chit Shakti which we allowed to use us, rather. I mean, we don't misuse it, we yield ourselves to it.